I got solving quadratic equations by completing the square.
Okay. Can you verbalize it?
Yeah. So it says find the value of c that completes the square.
Okay.
And the first one is x squared minus 8x plus c.
Okay. I tell you what. Let me give you one, and then we'll do that one.
Okay.
Okay. Here is a quadratic that I cannot solve this by factoring it.
All right.
Okay. So I can either use the quadratic formula or I can complete the square. Okay.
All
If
right.
I'm going to complete the square, then I'm going to probably do this. I'm going to put everything with x on it in one side and everything else on the other. And the important part to realize here is you never change it when you go from row to row when you are completing the square.
All right.
Make sure your equation never changes. Now I'm going to put parentheses around that, and I'm going to complete the square inside the parentheses such that I will be able to call this x minus some number squared.
Okay.
Now, the way you do it, it's the same method every time. You take half of the coefficient of the x term and square it. What's that equal to?
The coefficient square. So the coefficient. So it'd just be 2
Take
or
half of
negative
it
2. So it'd be 4, and
and
then
square 4.
yeah, so that would be 2. Oh no, it's 16. Sorry.
Okay, and I'm always
That's
adding
square
it.
root.
Okay, now I just added 16 to the left side of this equation, so I got to add 16 to the right if I don't want to change anything. In other words, this equation right there is still the same as what I started with.
Yeah, it's just plus 6 at the end. No,
Well,
equals equals
now,
6.
now what I'm going to do is because I've completed the square, I can write that as x minus 4 quantity squared.
Okay.
Add these two together, you get 6. Now I can solve it by what? How would I solve that equation right there?
Um. So you'd square root both x and 4,
Very
I think.
good.
Then
Not
whatever it
x
is.
and 4. You would square root both sides.
Okay.
Now, what that leaves me is x minus 4 on the left side, and what it leaves me on the right side is plus or minus root 6.
Okay.
Make sure you see that. Whenever you are solving an equation by taking the square root of both sides, always begin your answer with the words plus or minus.
Okay.
Now, I'm solving for x, so I'm going to move the 4 over, and I get an answer that looks an awful lot like what I would have gotten had I used the quadratic formula. In fact, I would have gotten exactly that.
Okay.
Okay,
Cool.
so that's how you complete the square. Read me your problem again since I don't want to scroll back up to it.
It was a x squared minus 8x plus c.
And the question was, what?
To find the value of c. That completes the square.
That completes the square. Okay. So what is C got to be?
Uh, uh,
Same process. In other words, you're separating that. Now you're going to
oh,
take half that coefficient of the x term and square it.
Okay, so be a negative 16 or positive 16?
Positive.
Uh, okay.
It's always positive. In other words, if C is 16, then that's completed the square, because the whole reason you complete the square is so that you can state it as a linear term squared. You will
Okay.
always be able to express it like that, and that's why it's valuable. There are so many formats like this. There's Vertex Format, where you have y equals a times x minus h squared plus k. So look at that. You get that from completing the square. Also, your conic sections, your equations for circles and ellipses, you need to complete the square there. There are so
Okay.
many places you need to complete the square. Okay? And it's really quite simple. You take half of that number and you square it.
Okay, cool.
What else you got?
Let's see. I got x squared minus 2x plus c. So there'll be x squared plus 1. No, so it'd just be x squared plus x plus
Well,
c. Oh.
the question is what do we need to add right there to complete the square? Forget the
Would
C
that
for a
be?
moment. I think they're confusing you a little bit by this putting a C in there. Just what would I have to do to complete the square there?
You'd have to put in. Hold on. Would that be 2 or no?
Same method, doesn't change. It's always the same. You take half of this coefficient and you square it.
Yeah, that'd be 1.
Okay, that's what C is.
Oh, okay.
Because now that allows me to write this expression as x minus 1 squared. But what
Okay,
you're
cool.
saying is what number should go there such that you are completing the square. That's what they mean to say. They're making it a little more confusing than is necessary.
All right, All right. Uh, let's see here. X squared minus 15x plus c.
Let's do this. Whenever you're completing the square, put parentheses, leave a space like that. Notice I haven't changed anything. I've
Okay.
just rewritten it in a way that I'm going to be able to complete the square. So what's my
Okay.
rule?
Uh, put it in half and then square it.
Okay, so half of 15 is 15 halves. Now square that.
15 halves squared.
Leave
I don't have my
it as
calculator
a
with me.
fraction. Do not put it in a decimal.
Oh, okay. So would I square both the top and the bottom?
Uh-huh.
So, 1 second.
And it's always plus. Because even if it's minus 15, once I square it, it turns plus, right?
Yeah, so it's 225 over 4.
And that's the answer. That's what C is.
Okay.
Now, how can I write this?
Um,
In
I
other
think
words,
that would be
if I want to write it as a
x
linear
plus
term,
225 over 4 squared
you x minus 15 over
minus.
2. In other words, whatever you get when you divide that by 2, that's what goes there.
Okay.
Notice that what this means is x minus 15 halves times x minus 15 halves. If you FOIL those, you get x squared minus 15x plus 225 over 4.
Okay.
So
All right,
remember
cool.
that. The reason you're completing the square is you're trying to take a quadratic and write it as a linear term squared.
All right, gotcha. Uh,
think
see
you
what
got
else.
these. Can you find something a little harder? Or a little,
Yeah,
how about a
yeah,
little?
it goes on to the next section after this.
Okay,
It
let's do
says
that. We
complete
have
the
a limited
square.
amount of time. I don't want to spend the whole half hour doing something that I think you know how to do now.
Okay. Complete the square for the expression, then factor the trinomial.
Okay,
And the first one seems pretty simple. It's x squared minus 10x.
what else?
That's all. And it says complete the square for the expression, then factor the trinomial.
Okay, complete the square.
So after that, so it'll be x minus 25. No, it's positive. So x plus 25. No. Oh, so
Always,
you just add 25 at the end?
yep, always at the end. In other words, always
Okay.
leave it in polynomial format, where
Okay.
highest degree goes on the left, the next degree goes in the middle, any numbers go on the end. Okay,
Okay.
so we've completed the square, and now factor the trinomial. Notice this is a trinomial. There's 1, 2, 3 terms.
Yeah.
So how does that factor?
So would that be, 1 second. So, sorry. So it'd be in parentheses x minus hmm, I'm not
This is
sure.
no different than the problems we've been doing. In other words, I confused you by writing that.
No, it's okay.
This is x minus 5 squared. It always is
Oh,
going to be that.
oh, so it's just for C.
So
Okay,
it's
I
x
see what you mean.
minus 5 times x minus 5. That's fact.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Okay, I think I understand now.
Okay, good. Let's do
Okay.
one more just to make sure you understand that principle.
Yeah.
Do one more like this.
X squared minus 40x.
Okay?
So you split that in half and square it, so whatever 20 squared is, that's 400.
Okay?
So be x minus 20 squared.
Or since they said factor it, let's write it like that.
Okay.
Okay? It's the same as x minus 20 squared, but they specifically said factor it, so let's show them both factors. Either answer would be correct. And certainly the x
Okay.
minus 20 squared, you're always going to be able to write that immediately. The whole point of
Yeah.
completing the square is so that you can write it as x minus some number quantity squared.
Okay, cool.
All right. How about another section? I think you get that one.
Yeah. Uh this one says solve the equation by
Good,
completing
finally,
the
because
square
that's where it's
round your
really going to come in useful. Okay.
yeah. Okay. Uh x squared plus 14x equals 15.
All right. Now, if I were to move that 15 to the left, I would find that that does not factor. Well, actually, it does. It does factor, but we'll get to that in a second. Let's solve it by completing the square. That's a better thing to do. So all
Yeah.
I got to do to complete the square is put a parentheses there, and leave some room.
Oh, okay, then 49.
Okay, so I'm going to add 49.
49.
What do I have to do so that I do not change the equation?
Uh, you would you go into separate one and then be x equals
Uh,
7
uh,
squared?
uh, uh.
No?
So what
Oh,
I
oh
do is
yeah, add
add
it to the other side.
49 to both sides. In other words, once I've written in a plus 49 there, I've changed the left side. So if I want
Okay,
to keep everything the same, I got to add 49 to the right side.
okay.
Now, how am I going to write the left side?
Would that be? Oh, it'd be x plus 7 squared.
Yeah, and this time let's leave it like that. The right
Okay.
side is 64. Now solve this by taking the square root of both sides.
Oh, so would that just be x plus 7 equals 8? So x equals
Uh,
1.
Remember when I said Every time you solve an equation, by taking the square root of both sides, begin your answer with what? The words plus or minus.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And that's extremely important. You're going to lose a solution if you don't do it. You'll lose points. Okay?
All right, gotcha.
So now what?
Hold on, I'm just writing this down real quick. 1 sec.
Okay.
All right. And then it would just be x equals 1, plus or minus 1.
No, well, let's do it. First of all, when I move the 7 over, it becomes a minus 7.
Okay.
I still have the plus or minus 8. You have to know what this means.
Oh, so it has
What
two
it means
solutions.
is
So,
minus 7 plus 8, and it also means minus 7 minus 8. Well, this solution is 1. This
yeah,
solution is minus 15.
yeah.
Okay,
So would I include that?
so there's my two solutions. X equals 1 and x equals minus 15.
Okay.
And if I plug that in, you can see where it's true. If x equals 1, I got 8 squared is 64. And if x equals minus 15, I got negative 8 squared equals 64, which is also true.
Okay.
All right. Now, let's go back just because whenever I've done this the hard way, they asked me to do it by completing the square, so I did so. But there's actually a much easier way to do it. Let me show you. It's x squared plus 14x equals 15, correct?
Yep.
Let's just solve it like a regular normal quadratic. Let's put everything on one side. That turns that to a minus, 0 on the other. And now notice that that factors perfectly into x plus 15 and x minus 1, which gives you two solutions.
Oh.
X equals 1, x equals minus 15. So far easier to just factor it to solve it, except for the fact that they said solve it by completing the square. Now, if I make that number, say, 17 instead of 15, now I'm not going to be able to factor it. When I move that 17 over to the other side, there are no factors.
Okay.
In this case, I would have to use the quadratic formula, but the alternative to the quadratic formula would be solve it by completing the square, just like we did. And you'll get exactly the same answer as you would have gotten with the quadratic formula. And in fact, the quadratic formula I can solve by taking the standard format for a quadratic and completing the square, and that's how you get the quadratic formula.
Okay. Cool.
Okay.
All right, I got 2x squared plus 20x plus 44 equals 0.
And I want you to solve it by
completing the square.
Okay.
So I think right off the bat you would half it all, right? Because 2x squared.
Yeah. Yes, for sure. So let's do that. But then I want to show you something else because it's pertinent. Okay. But you're right. I'm going to turn this into a simple quadratic if I can do so.
All right.
Are there factors of 22 that add to 10?
There's 11 and 2 and
that's it. Both of those are prime numbers. Once you get two prime numbers, you're not going to find any other factors. So 11 and 2 do not add to 10. Which means I cannot factor this. So I got two choices. I can use the quadratic formula or I can complete the square. If
All
I'm
right.
going to complete the square, then I'm going to stick that 22 on the other side.
Okay.
Going to put parentheses there. Haven't changed anything. Everything's the same from there to there to there.
All
Now
right.
complete the square inside the parentheses.
So would that just be? Would you half that and then square it? So it'd be
Just like,
25.
just like every other time. Always.
Cool.
Now what do I got to do to the
And
right side?
do the right side. You gotta I'm thinking. Would
Remember, the
you?
goal is to not change anything from row to row. Well, I just
Oh,
changed something.
so
I
would you
just
add
added
25 to that too,
25 to
or
the left side.
yeah, would you add 25 to that to
Yeah,
the right side?
yeah. Now
Okay.
I haven't changed anything. Now rewrite this as a square,
So
as a
all right, so that would be x squared
uh,
plus
rewrite
oh
it as a
x
linear
plus
time
5
square.
squared.
There you go.
Yeah,
X
x plus
plus
5
5
squared
quantity
equals
squared equals 3.
3. Yeah.
Now keep going.
Uh, th mm, hold on. It would be equal, x plus 5 squared equals 3. I don't know.
How do you solve that equation right there? Whenever one side is squared and the other side isn't, what's your next
Or
step?
would you have to square root it?
Okay, so give me the answer.
Oh, so it would just be x plus 5 equals the square root of 3.
When you are taking the square root of both sides, always begin your answer with what words?
Plus or minus.
Okay, so it's plus or minus the square root of 3.
All right.
Now when you solve it, you move the 5 over, and notice you get an answer that looks just like you would get if you were to have used the quadratic formula. Now, which is harder? I don't know. That's kind of up to you. Quadratic formula, if you have it memorized and you know how to do it, then you're always going to get it right. Completing the square, they want you to work on completing the square, okay? So,
Okay.
I'm going to give you one just because I want you to experience it. We only have 5 minutes and I want you to realize why this is different. Complete the square.
Okay, so on the left side you'd half it first because 2x. So then you'd have 4x and you'd have to split that in half and square it. So it'd be 4. So
Well, let's
with
stop.
2 so it'd be
Let's stop for a second. First of all, you realize that you cannot complete the square until the coefficient of x squared is 1. So the very
yeah.
first thing you had to do was factor out a 2.
Yeah.
You realize that. So far, I haven't changed anything, okay? Now you complete the square inside the parentheses. So I take half of 4, which is 2. I square it.
And then it's 4 again.
Now what do
Yeah.
I have to write on the right side?
So on the right side would you do plus 4 as well?
How much did I just add to the left side when I wrote in this plus 4?
Uh would that be
8.
8? Yeah.
So I got to add 8 to this side over here.
Oh, okay. Makes
Because I
sense.
factored out this 2, well, that 2 doesn't go anywhere. That 2 is multiplying that 4. So when I completed the square and I wrote 4, the 4 that is circled, then I was adding 8 to the left side.
Okay.
So whenever you have to factor this coefficient out, and you always do, you cannot complete the square until that thing is factored out, no matter what it is. And it doesn't have to be a nice number. Make that 7x, and now you factor it out, and you get 7 halves right there.
Okay, cool.
Now you take half of 7 halves and square it, and you're into complicated fractions. But regardless of whether this 2 factors out smoothly or not, you always have to factor it out.
Okay,
Or
cool.
whatever it is. If it was a 3, you'd have to factor out a 3 and so forth.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
And that should cover you for completing the square. That's really as complicated as it ever gets, is when you
Okay, cool.
factor out a coefficient. So
All
I'm
right, gotcha.
going to let you go, and let me just double check. I think we are set for Saturday at noon.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you then, Sully.
All right, cool. See ya.
Bye bye.
Bye.